Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, it's February 13th. You know what day that is, right? I'm gonna read some selections from here. There's a lot I could read, but I could only want to hit you with so many videos. So. The adoption of the Lindemann Plan produced no startling, obvious changes in bombing tactics perceptible even to the German civilian population. Ever since the first area bombing, the above-mentioned raid on Mannheim in December 1940, the British air chiefs, on their own initiative, had been carrying out their orders to reduce German industrial production by an easier method than by dropping bombs through the roofs of factories. They argued that the desired results would be more readily achieved if the homes of the workers in the factories were destroyed. If the workers were kept busy arranging for the burial of their wives and children, output might reasonably be expected to fall. Thus, the adoption of the Lindemann Plan merely gave express government sanction to tactics which had long been adopted with semi-official approval. The Lindemann Plan was first carried into effect on the 28th of March 1942 when Lübeck was attacked by 234 aircraft of Bomber Command. This beautiful old Hanseatic port had no military or special industrial importance, but was chosen because, as Air Marshal Harris subsequently described it, the city was built more like a firelighter than a human habitation. The focus of the attack was the Altstadt, right, the old city, composed of medieval houses with narrow, tortuous streets. Some 30,000 people lived in an area of 2 square kilometers. Photographic reconnaissance showed the raid had been a first-class success. From 45% to 50% of the city was totally destroyed, together with the cathedral and the market hall. During the last 7 years, full particulars with copious official statistics have been published governing the subsequent course of the Great Air Offensive. The grisly story can be read elsewhere. Here it will be sufficient to say that one first-class success followed another. The climax of the offensive was reached on the night of February 13th, 1945, when a mass raid by several thousand heavy bombers was directed against Dresden. The result of this air raid was indisputably a first-class success, far surpassing all previous first-class successes. Naturally, there was jubilation at Supreme Allied Headquarters in Paris, which approved the dispatch from the Associated Press correspondent announcing that Allied war chiefs have made the long-awaited decision to adopt deliberate terror bombing of German population centers as a ruthless expedient to hasten Hitler's doom. The all-out air war in Germany became obvious with the unprecedented assault on the refugee-crowded Saxon capital 2 weeks ago. The text of this sensational announcement will be found quoted more fully earlier in this book. Almost at once, however, it was realized that if the decision to adopt ruthless terror bombing was held up for public glorification, the question would be asked, when had this decision been reached? Remembering that this was not, as stated, a long-awaited decision, but a decision taken nearly 3 years before, which had been repeatedly and solemnly denied by ministers of the Crown and Parliament, Commander Brabner, Under Secretary of State for Air, was instructed to repeat these denials and to assure the House of Commons that the statement approved by the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Paris was incorrect. Officially, no crime against humanity had been committed. A stringent taboo prevented the publication of details, and the matter was quickly forgotten by the public. Indisputably, the destruction of Dresden was not only an outstanding event of the Second World War, but an outstanding event of European history, an event which was the culmination of that fatal addiction to civil war in which the nations of Europe have been indulging for centuries. Yeah, ain't that right? Those at the time who desired information concerning the destruction of Dresden naturally consulted the monumental work in 4 volumes of Sir Winston Churchill, which purported to give a complete record of the events of the Second World War, and found what they sought on page 470 of Volume 4, Triumph and Tragedy. They had, however, to be content with 22 words. Throughout January and February 1945, our bombers continued to attack, and we made a heavy raid in the latter month on Dresden. Sir Winston has nothing further to say on the subject. The following account of the bombings of Dresden was first published in 1953 in the American edition of the present book. For 10 years, until the publication of a book entirely devoted to this subject and based on British official records, right, The Destruction of Dresden by David Living, who's that? It remained the only account in the English language of the Schreckensnacht, right, the Night of Terror, right, of February 13th, 1945. It was mainly based on Der Tod von Dresden, right, the death of Dresden, by Axel Rodenberger, right, published by Das Grünblatt, right, the Green Leaves, Dortmund, 1951. The first German writer to collect all the then available facts concerning this Holocaust. No material facts have come to light since 1951, which make revision necessary of what the present author wrote in 1953. This book was originally written in 1953, and then these are addendums. Reverting to the authoritative work of Air Marshal Harris, Bomber Offensive, it is noteworthy that even the gallant Air Marshal's hardihood falters in regard to the mass bombing by some 2,000 heavy bombing planes of Dresden on the night of February 13th, 1945, when the normal population of this large and splendid city was swollen by a horde of terrified women and children from the eastern provinces of Germany in flight from the most dreadful fate which had ever confronted a large European population since the Mongol invasion in 1241. In February 1945, the war had, of course, long ceased to be a military operation and had become merely the breaking of the desperate but hopeless resistance of a defeated people, the leaders of which faced death and the remains of slavery. Selecting his words with obvious care, the Air Marshal writes, I will only say that the attack on Dresden was at the time considered a military necessity by much more important people than myself. Yeah, he's right. It will be noted that the Air Marshal pointedly refrains from endorsing the opinion of these important people. He leaves it open to speculation whether this was due to a modest shrinking from associating himself with so much importance, or whether, after reflecting on the facts and circumstances, to sheer horror. It is further to be noted that he attributes this opinion to these important people as held by them only at the time, from which it may be deduced that he cannot bring himself to believe that any sane person could still hold such an opinion. Finally, it will be noted that he loyally refrains from disclosing the identity of these important people. An examination of the situation existing at the time of this great mass air raid will provide an explanation of the Air Marshal's studied reticence. In February 1945, the war had been won, and no military purpose remained to be served by the indiscriminate bombing. From the east, the Russian hordes were advancing steadily and irresistibly. In the center, they had reached the Oder on a wide front on each side of Frankfurt an der Oder, only 50 miles east of Berlin. On the right wing, the greater part of East Prussia, which for 700 years had served as an advanced bastion of Europe against Asia, had been subdued. On the left wing, Lower Silesia had been overrun, although the capital, Breslau, closely surrounded, continued to offer a resistance as heroic as this city had offered the Mongol hordes of Batu almost exactly 700 years before. In the west, the armies of General Eisenhower were advancing on a wide front to the Rhine. The surviving German armies in the field continued to resist, not from any lingering hope that defeat could be averted, but because their enemies' insistence on unconditional surrender made it seem preferable to a people brought up for generations on the tradition of Frederick the Great to go down fighting to the last. The publication of the infamous Morgenthau Plan, thank you, Henry Stimson, had left it no doubt what were the conqueror's intentions, whether Germany surrendered at once or a final stand was made. The only military problem remaining in February of 1945, as such it can be called, was the question along what line running north and south across Germany the invaders of Germany from the west would meet the invaders of Germany from the east. In fact, the campaign which had commenced on the Normandy beaches in the previous summer had become a mere race with the Soviet hordes, a race in which anything which the Germans could do to retard the progress of the latter, although of no practical benefit to themselves, would be of enormous political value to the Western powers. Nevertheless, the British and Americans decided to launch a mass air attack on Dresden, then about 70 miles behind the scanty German forces resisting desperately the Russian advance across Lower Silesia. Very little authoritative information has been available until very recently concerning this mass air raid. In the earliest books, which dealt with the last stage of the war, the course usually adopted was to refer airily to the bombing of Dresden as the last of a long series of mass air raids in which it had happened that an exceptionally large number of people were killed. As a result of this general reticence, little could be added for a long time to the following reference to this air raid published in the Times 3 days after it had taken place. Dresden, which had been pounded on Tuesday night by 800 of the 1,400 heavies sent out by the RAF, and was the main object of 1,350 fortress and liberators on the following day, yesterday received its third heavy attack in 36 hours. It was the principal target for more than 1,100 United States 8th Army Air Force bombers. Other British newspapers reported similarly. In none of them was any attempt made to explain why Dresden should have been selected as the target for such a terrific concentration of force. Reference to a guidebook will provide no clue. The modern city of Dresden had grown up around the medieval town now known as the Altstadt, right? The Altstadt, which lies at the southern end of the bridge crossing the Elbe. In the 18th century, Dresden became one of the great show cities of the world through the construction of a number of magnificent public buildings, all of which were erected in the Altstadt district of the city. Within a radius of half a mile from the southern end of the Augustus Bridge was built a unique group of palaces, art galleries, museums, and churches. The Schloss contained the famous Grünes Gewölbe with its priceless art treasures. The beautiful Brühl Terrasse extended along the left bank of the Elbe, the beautiful Catholic Cathedral, the domed Frauenkirche, the Opera House of the Johannum Museum, and above all the famous Schwinger Museum, containing one of the finest collections of pictures in the world, including amongst its many treasures Raphael's Sistine Madonna, purchased by the Elector Augustus II in 1745 for 20,000 ducats. Within this small area, so well known to British and American travelers on the continent, there were and could be no munition factories or, in fact, industries of any kind. The resident population of this district was small. The main railway station of Dresden is situated a mile away to the south, and the railway bridge which carries the main line to Berlin is half a mile away down the river. The following brief details of this raid, which are now well established, are added in application of the contemporary report from the Times set out above. On the morning of the fateful February 13th, 1945, fast enemy reconnaissance planes were observed flying over the city. The inhabitants of the Dresden had no experience with modern air warfare, and the appearance of these planes aroused curiosity rather than apprehension. Having been for so long outside any theater of war, the city lacked anti-aircraft defenses, and these planes were also able to observe in complete safety all that they desired. No doubt they observed and reported that all the roads through and around Dresden were filled with dense throngs moving westward. It is impossible, however, that these throngs could have been mistaken for troop concentrations. It was common knowledge that the German High Command had thrown in its last reserve to reinforce the crumbling battlefronts, and consequently there existed no troops which could possibly be massing so far from any fighting. It was also common knowledge that a frantic orgy of murder, rape, and arson was taking place in those districts of Silesia, which had been overrun by the Soviet hordes. It should not have been difficult to deduce in these circumstances that many people in districts threatened by the Russian advance would decide to try to escape westwards. I'll continue for another vid.